Everyone knew the billionaire's name. But that morning, nobody stopped to ask if he was okay. Nathan Whitmore had spent most of his life building a world that others could only imagine. At 40 years old, he was the founder and CEO of Whitmore Holdings, a company that had grown from a small idea into a global success. His face appeared on business magazines, his decisions influenced major industries, and his schedule was filled with meetings that could change the future of thousands of people. To the outside world, Nathan had everything: wealth, power, recognition. But there was one thing no one could see. The man who seemed to control everything was slowly losing connection with the simple moments that made life meaningful. Every morning in New York City followed the same pattern. A private car arrived. A packed schedule waited. Another meeting. Another decision. Another reminder that everyone around him needed something. His assistant needed answers. Investors needed results. Employees needed leadership. But almost no one asked what Nathan needed. That winter morning started like every other day. Nathan left an important business meeting near Manhattan, carrying the weight of another difficult decision. The company was growing, but the pressure was growing with it. For years, he believed responsibility meant never slowing down. He believed successful people did not get tired. They simply kept moving. But even the strongest people have limits. As he walked through the crowded train station, surrounded by thousands of strangers, Nathan felt the exhaustion he had ignored for too long. The announcements echoed through the station. Footsteps moved in every direction. People hurried toward their destinations, focused on their own lives. Then, for a brief moment, Nathan's world became quiet. The man everyone recognized disappeared into the crowd. He was no longer a billionaire CEO. He was simply a person having a difficult moment. Many people noticed something was wrong. Some looked over. Some slowed down for a second. But most continued walking. In a city where everyone was rushing somewhere, stopping for a stranger felt impossible. Until Grace Mitchell stopped. Grace was 30 years old, a single mother who understood that life did not always give people easy choices. She worked long hours at a small bakery and spent every day making sure her young daughter had everything she needed. She did not have a luxury apartment or a powerful career title. She did not live a life where problems disappeared with money. But she had something Nathan had forgotten existed: compassion without expectation. When Grace saw a man struggling, she did not see a famous CEO. She did not see a headline or a business opportunity. She saw someone who needed help. She walked toward him and gently asked if he was all right. Her voice was calm. Her expression showed genuine concern. There was no curiosity about his identity, no attempt to gain anything from the situation, just kindness. Nathan slowly opened his eyes and saw a woman he had never met standing beside him. For a moment, he was confused. He was used to people approaching him because of his success. But Grace was different. She did not know his name. She did not know his company. She only knew that a person needed someone to care. And that simple act of kindness, given freely by a stranger at a crowded train station, would become the moment that changed both of their lives forever. The first thing Nathan Whitmore noticed when he opened his eyes was not the luxury around him. It was the question he had heard before everything became clear. Are you all right? It was a simple question. A question that most people asked without thinking. But for Nathan, it felt strangely unfamiliar. He had spent years surrounded by people who knew his position, his success, and his influence. Yet almost no one stopped to ask about him as a person. The moment at the train station stayed in his mind long after he returned to his world. Nathan woke up in a private medical room arranged by his assistant after Grace Mitchell helped him. Everything was exactly what his life had always provided: professional care, comfortable surroundings, immediate solutions. Problems were handled quickly because money made things easier. But there was one thing money could not explain. Why did a stranger care when she had nothing to gain? His assistant entered the room with information about the woman who had helped him. Her name is Grace Mitchell, he said. She works at a small bakery nearby. She is a single mother. Nathan listened quietly. Normally, he would have thanked someone and moved on. His life was built around efficiency. Find a problem, solve it, continue forward. But this situation felt different. Grace had not treated him like a billionaire. She had not recognized his value through his bank account or his company. She had simply seen someone who needed help. Later that day, Nathan made a decision. He wanted to thank her personally. He found the small bakery where Grace worked and stepped inside. The place was nothing like the expensive restaurants and private clubs he was used to visiting. It was warm, simple, and filled with the sounds of ordinary conversations. Grace looked up from behind the counter and immediately recognized him. But her reaction surprised him. She did not become nervous. She did not suddenly act differently. She simply smiled. "I am glad you are feeling better," she said. Nathan paused. Those words meant more than she realized. "You know who I am?" he asked. Grace nodded slightly. "I found out after that day." She smiled softly. "But honestly, it does not change anything. You were still someone who needed help." Nathan had heard many compliments throughout his career. People praised his intelligence, his achievements, and his business decisions. But this felt different. Grace was not impressed by what he owned. She cared about who he was. "Most people would have expected something in return," Nathan said. Grace looked surprised. "Why would I expect anything?" she answered. "Someone was having a difficult moment. That was enough." Her response stayed with him. In Nathan's world, almost every conversation had a purpose. Every meeting had an objective. Every connection had some kind of value attached. But Grace had reminded him that some actions were valuable simply because they were kind. While sitting inside the small bakery, Nathan noticed details he usually ignored. The handwritten notes on the counter. The customers who greeted Grace by name. The way she balanced work with caring for her daughter. Her life was not easy, but there was a warmth around her that money had never created for him. Before leaving, Nathan thanked her again. Grace only smiled and told him to take care of himself. As he walked back into the busy streets of New York, Nathan realized something had changed. The woman at the train station did not know his name, his company, or his wealth. She had helped him before knowing any of those things. And for the first time in years, Nathan wondered if the person who needed saving was not his business, but himself. For the first time in many years, Nathan Whitmore found himself returning to a place where nobody cared about his reputation. The small bakery on the corner of a quiet New York street became a place where he was not a billionaire, not a CEO, and not the man whose decisions affected thousands of employees. He was simply Nathan, and somehow, that felt unfamiliar. After leaving the bakery that first day, Nathan expected the feeling to disappear. He thought it would become another memory hidden among countless business meetings and important decisions. But it did not. He kept remembering the way Grace Mitchell spoke to him. She did not sound impressed. She did not sound nervous. She spoke with the same kindness she would have shown to anyone else. That was something Nathan could not understand. His entire life, people had treated him differently after learning his name. Some wanted opportunities. Some wanted connections. Some wanted to be close to his success. But Grace had already shown him kindness before knowing any of those things. A few days later, Nathan returned to the bakery again. This time, he noticed more than just the warm atmosphere. He noticed Grace. She moved between customers, remembered their usual orders, and greeted everyone with genuine care. Behind the counter was a woman carrying many responsibilities, but she never allowed those responsibilities to take away her kindness. Nathan watched as Grace helped an elderly customer choose a pastry, then quickly answered a question from another customer while checking a message from her daughter's school. It was a simple moment, but to Nathan it revealed something powerful. Grace was building a life around people, not achievements. Later, when the bakery became quieter, Nathan asked Grace how she managed everything. She smiled and looked toward the small notebook sitting near the register. "Some days are harder than others," she said. "But I remind myself that my daughter is watching how I handle life. I want her to learn that difficult moments do not decide who we become." Nathan looked at the notebook and noticed pages filled with ideas, recipes, and plans for a future she had not given up on. Grace dreamed of opening her own bakery someday. It was not a dream built on fame or becoming wealthy. It was a dream built on creating a place where people felt welcome. Nathan understood that feeling. In a different way, he had once dreamed of building something meaningful too. But somewhere along the road, success had become more important than purpose. "You should believe in that dream," Nathan said. Grace looked surprised. "It is easier to believe when you are not worried about every bill and every responsibility," she replied. Her words were honest, not bitter. Nathan respected that. She was not asking him to fix her life. She was simply sharing her reality. That moment changed the way Nathan saw her. He realized Grace was not someone waiting to be rescued. She was already fighting for her future every day. She only needed someone to recognize her potential. As Nathan walked away from the bakery that evening, He carried a thought he could not ignore. He had spent years using his resources to solve problems. But Grace had shown him something different. Sometimes people did not need someone to take over their journey. Sometimes they only needed someone to believe they could complete it themselves. And for the first time, Nathan wondered how much he still had to learn from the woman who had helped him without expecting anything in return. For the first time in years, Nathan Whitmore faced a decision that could not be solved with a signature, a business strategy, or a financial investment. It was a decision about who he wanted to become. After spending more time around Grace Mitchell, Nathan began to see the world differently. He noticed the small things he once ignored. The way people smiled when Grace entered the bakery. The way customers trusted her because she remembered their stories, not just their orders. The way she carried responsibilities without expecting sympathy. But Nathan also started to notice something else. Grace was struggling quietly. One evening, he saw her sitting at the bakery after closing, reviewing bills and writing notes in her small dream notebook. The excitement in her eyes was still there, but there was also uncertainty. She wanted to open her own bakery someday, but the cost of turning that dream into reality felt impossible. Nathan knew he could change everything with one phone call. He could buy a building, invest thousands of dollars, and remove every obstacle standing in her way. That was how he had always handled problems. Find a challenge. Use resources. Create a solution. But something stopped him. He remembered what Grace had told him. She did not want someone to take over her life. She wanted the chance to build it herself. The next day, Nathan returned to the bakery and offered something different. Instead of simply giving her money, he offered guidance, connections, and an opportunity to learn about growing a small business. Grace listened carefully, but she hesitated. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Nathan paused. In the past, he would have answered with a practical reason, a business explanation, a clear objective. But this time, he answered honestly. Because someone believed I mattered when she had no reason to. Grace looked at him quietly. She understood that his words were not about charity. They were about gratitude. Still, she wanted to make something clear. "I appreciate your kindness," she said. "But I do not want my story to become something people tell because a wealthy person changed my life. I want it to be because I worked for it." Those words stayed with Nathan. He admired her more in that moment than he had before. Grace was not looking for a shortcut. She was protecting her independence. She was protecting the value of her own effort. Nathan realized that his biggest mistake in life had been assuming every problem needed his control. Grace showed him that sometimes the greatest form of support was simply standing beside someone and believing in them. However, not everyone around Nathan understood his choices. When people in his business circle heard about his connection with Grace, questions began to appear. Some wondered why a successful CEO was spending time with someone outside his world. Others believed people like Grace did not belong near someone with Nathan's reputation. Nathan heard the opinions, but this time they did not control him. For years, he had built his life around other people's expectations. But the woman who helped him on that difficult morning had shown him a different way to live. A way where kindness mattered more than appearances. A way where success meant more than numbers. And as Nathan continued walking between two very different worlds, he began to realize that the greatest change in his life was not happening in his company. It was happening inside himself. The opinions around Nathan Whitmore continued to grow, but for the first time in his life, he found himself less concerned about what people thought and more focused on what was right. For years, Nathan had built his reputation by making difficult decisions without hesitation. He was known as a leader who could analyze numbers, predict challenges, and create solutions faster than anyone else. But Grace Mitchell had introduced him to a different kind of wisdom. Some problems could not be solved by money. Some people did not need to be rescued. They needed to be respected. As Nathan continued helping Grace develop her bakery dream, he made sure every decision came from her. He asked questions instead of giving orders. He listened instead of assuming. It was a small change, but for someone like Nathan, it was enormous. One afternoon, Nathan visited the bakery and found Grace organizing her recipes and business notes. She looked tired, but there was a quiet excitement in her eyes. She had been researching suppliers, planning menus, and learning everything she could about running her own business. Nathan smiled because he realized something important. Grace was not waiting for someone to create her future. She was already building it. "You know," Nathan said, "most people would have accepted an easier path." Grace looked up from her notebook. Maybe, she replied. But I want my daughter to see that dreams are worth working for. Those words stayed with Nathan. He thought about his own journey. When he started his company, he had also believed in a dream. But somewhere along the way, success became about proving himself instead of creating something meaningful. Grace reminded him of the person he used to be before everything became about competition and expectations. Meanwhile, Nathan's professional world became more complicated. Some members of his company questioned his decisions. They wondered why the CEO of a major corporation was spending time supporting a small bakery owner. They could not understand why someone with unlimited resources would care about a person from a completely different background. But Nathan understood something they did not. Grace was not important because of what she could offer him. She was important because she reminded him of values he had forgotten. One evening, Nathan invited Grace to a small business event where local entrepreneurs shared their stories. He wanted her to meet people who could help her learn and grow. When Grace arrived, she felt out of place surrounded by experienced business owners and investors. She quietly told Nathan she was not sure she belonged there. Nathan looked at her and said, "You do not need to become someone else to belong in this room." Those words gave her confidence. For years, Grace had measured herself by what she lacked. But Nathan saw what she had: determination, creativity, integrity, the qualities that could not be bought or taught. That night, Grace shared her bakery idea with others, and people listened. Not because Nathan introduced her, not because of his name. They listened because her passion was real. Watching her speak, Nathan felt something he had not felt in a long time. Pride. Not the pride of owning something valuable. The pride of seeing someone discover their own strength. And as their connection grew deeper, Nathan began to understand that the person who helped him that morning at the train station had given him more than a moment of kindness. She had given him a new way to see the world. The night after the business event, Nathan Whitmore sat alone in his office long after everyone else had left. The city lights of New York stretched across the glass windows, creating a beautiful view that many people dreamed of having. But Nathan barely noticed it. For years, this office had represented everything he had achieved: the success, the recognition, the power. Yet now, standing in the same place, he realized how much he had changed. The things that once seemed important no longer felt the same. He thought about Grace Mitchell and the way she approached life. She did not have a team of assistants managing every detail. She did not have unlimited resources or people waiting to solve her problems. But she had something Nathan had slowly lost: a genuine connection with the people around her. The next morning, Nathan received an invitation to a private gathering with some of his closest business partners. He knew exactly what the conversation would be about. They had concerns about his recent choices. When Nathan arrived, the discussion quickly turned toward his relationship with Grace. Some believed he was allowing emotions to influence his judgment. Others questioned why he was investing time in someone outside their business world. Nathan listened quietly. In the past, he would have defended himself with numbers and achievements. He would have explained the benefits and calculated the results. But this time, he answered differently. "Not everything valuable can be measured on a spreadsheet," Nathan said. The room became quiet. Those words surprised even him, because years ago, he would never have said them. Later that day, Nathan visited Grace at the bakery. He found her preparing for another busy afternoon, balancing orders while helping her daughter with a school project. It was a simple scene, but it reminded him why he respected her. Grace was not trying to enter his world. She was creating her own. "Are you worried about what people think?" Nathan asked. Grace looked at him and smiled gently. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I have learned that if I spend my whole life trying to prove myself to everyone, I will forget who I am." Nathan understood those words more than she knew. He had spent years building an image that everyone admired, but he had forgotten the person behind that image. Grace had never asked him to become someone different. She had simply shown him that he was allowed to be human. As the weeks passed, Nathan continued supporting Grace's dream, but their connection became about much more than business. They talked about life, family, hopes, and the moments that shaped them. Nathan shared parts of himself that he rarely showed anyone. He talked about the pressure of always needing to succeed and the loneliness that came with constantly being responsible for others. Grace listened, not because she wanted something from him, but because she genuinely cared. For the first time in a long time, Nathan felt understood. He finally realized that the woman who helped him at the train station had given him something far greater than assistance during a difficult moment. She had given him permission to slow down, to reconnect, and to remember what truly mattered. Meanwhile, Grace began to see herself differently too. She was no longer just a single mother trying to get through each day. She was someone with talent, dreams, and the ability to build a future she could be proud of. Two people from completely different worlds were changing each other in ways neither of them expected. And the biggest transformation was not happening in their circumstances. It was happening in their hearts. For the first time in many years, Nathan Whitmore stopped measuring his days by meetings, deadlines, and financial results. He started measuring them by moments that actually mattered. A conversation with Grace, a smile from her daughter, a quiet afternoon inside a small bakery where nobody cared about his company or his reputation. Those moments slowly became more valuable than anything he had built in his professional life. But change was never easy, especially for someone like Nathan. The world around him was still watching. People who knew him as a powerful CEO struggled to understand why he was spending so much time with a single mother who lived a completely different life. They saw the difference in their backgrounds. They saw the distance between his wealth and her simple lifestyle. But they did not see what Nathan saw. They did not see the strength behind Grace's kindness. They did not see the courage it took for her to keep chasing her dreams while carrying so many responsibilities. One afternoon, Nathan visited the bakery and found Grace preparing for a meeting with a potential supplier. She looked nervous as she reviewed her notes. Nathan noticed the same determination he had seen from the beginning. "You know more about this than you realize," Nathan told her. Grace smiled, but looked uncertain. "Sometimes I feel like everyone else has more experience than me." Nathan looked around the bakery. "Maybe they have more experience, but they do not have your story. They do not have the reason behind why this matters to you." Grace thought about those words. For so long, she had focused on what she lacked. She worried about her limited resources, her small space, and the challenges ahead. She rarely stopped to recognize everything she had already overcome. Nathan had a similar realization about himself. He had spent years believing that success meant being the person with all the answers. But Grace showed him that true leadership was not about always standing above others. It was about understanding them. It was about creating opportunities for people to become their best selves. Their friendship continued to grow, and Nathan began opening up about parts of his life he had always kept private. He talked about the pressure of being responsible for an entire company. He talked about the expectations placed on him from a young age. He admitted that sometimes he felt surrounded by people, but still alone. Grace listened quietly. She did not try to solve everything. She simply reminded him that he did not always have to carry everything by himself. That simple understanding meant more to Nathan than any business success. Meanwhile, Grace began stepping into a new version of herself. With Nathan's encouragement and the opportunities she created through her own effort, she started believing that her bakery dream was not impossible. She began making plans, meeting new people, and building confidence. She was still the same caring mother, but she no longer saw herself as someone limited by her circumstances. She saw herself as someone capable of creating something meaningful. One evening, Nathan and Grace stood outside the bakery after closing. The streets of New York were filled with lights and the sounds of people moving through their lives. Nathan looked at the small shop and smiled. A few months earlier, he would have thought success meant owning something much bigger. But now he understood that sometimes the most valuable things were not the things that attracted attention. They were the things that quietly changed people. And Grace had changed him in a way no business strategy ever could. The small bakery on the corner of the New York street had become something neither Nathan Whitmore nor Grace Mitchell expected. It was no longer just a place where people bought coffee and pastries. It had become a place where dreams were slowly becoming real. Every morning, Grace opened the doors with the same quiet determination she had always carried. She still arrived early. She still prepared every detail herself. She still made sure every customer felt welcomed. But something inside her had changed. She no longer looked at her dream as something far away. She finally believed it was possible. Nathan noticed that change more than anyone. He saw the confidence in her eyes when she talked about new recipes. He saw the excitement when she discussed plans for expanding the bakery. He saw a woman who had always been strong, finally allowing herself to believe in her own abilities. For Nathan, That was the greatest success he could witness. He had spent years creating businesses, but helping someone discover their own potential felt different. It felt personal. One afternoon, Nathan visited the bakery and found Grace sitting with her daughter, looking through drawings and ideas for the future. Her daughter talked about how proud she was of her mother, and Nathan quietly smiled. That moment reminded him that Grace's greatest achievement was never just the bakery. It was the example she was creating every day. She was showing her daughter that challenges did not have to define a person. They could become the reason someone grew stronger. Later that week, Nathan invited Grace to visit his company headquarters. He wanted her to see the world he came from. As they walked through the large building, Grace looked around at the busy employees and modern offices. Years earlier, Nathan would have been proud to show only the success surrounding him. But now, he wanted her to see something deeper. He wanted her to understand the people behind the company, the employees who worked hard, the families depending on those jobs, the responsibility behind every decision. Grace noticed the difference in Nathan. He was still confident. He was still a successful CEO, but he was no longer distant. He greeted employees by name. He listened more carefully. He asked questions before making decisions. The man who once believed leadership meant having all the answers had learned that leadership also meant caring about the people affected by those answers. "You have changed," Grace told him as they looked across the office. Nathan smiled. "I think I finally remembered who I wanted to be." Those words stayed with Grace, because she realized something important too. Nathan had not entered her life to replace her strength. He had entered her life to remind her that her strength was already there. Their connection was not built on money, status, or what either person could provide. It was built on understanding. It was built on two people who came from completely different worlds, but found something familiar in each other. They both knew what it meant to carry responsibilities quietly. They both knew what it meant to keep going when life became difficult. And they both learned that sometimes the greatest changes begin when someone simply chooses to see you. As the weeks passed, Grace prepared to open the next chapter of her life. Her bakery dream was becoming a reality. Nathan continued leading his company with a different purpose. And both of them understood that the moment they met was not just a random event. It was the beginning of a journey that changed how they saw themselves and how they saw the world around them. Years later, Nathan Whitmore still remembered the moment when everything changed. Not because it was the day his life became easier, but because it was the day he finally understood what truly mattered. The busy train station in New York looked exactly the same as it had before. People moved quickly through the crowd. Trains arrived and departed. The city continued moving forward. But for Nathan, that place would always represent the beginning of a different life. He returned there one quiet evening with Grace Mitchell standing beside him. The two of them watched the same streets where two completely different worlds had crossed paths. Nathan thought about the man he used to be, a successful CEO who believed every problem had a financial solution, a man who had built a company worth billions but rarely allowed himself to slow down and connect with others. Then he thought about the woman who had walked toward him when everyone else kept moving. Grace had not known his name. She had not known his wealth. She had not known that the stranger she helped had the power to influence entire industries. She only knew one thing. Someone needed kindness. "I still cannot believe you stopped that day," Nathan said with a quiet smile. Grace looked at him and laughed softly. "I cannot believe you still remember it." Nathan looked around the station. "How could I forget? That was the first time in a long time someone treated me like a person instead of a position." Grace understood what he meant. She had learned something too. Before meeting Nathan, she believed her circumstances defined her. She saw herself only as a single mother trying to provide a stable life for her daughter. But through their journey, she discovered that her kindness, determination, and dreams were not small things. They were the very qualities that made her valuable. Her bakery had grown into a place where people gathered, shared stories, and felt welcomed. It was never just about selling food. It was about creating the same feeling she gave Nathan on that difficult morning. A feeling of being seen. Nathan's life had changed as well. He was still a billionaire CEO. He still carried important responsibilities. But he led differently now. He listened more. He valued people more. He understood that success was not only measured by numbers, profits, or recognition. It was measured by the positive impact a person left behind. One day, during an interview, Nathan was asked about the greatest decision he had ever made. Many expected him to mention a major business move or a company achievement. Instead, he smiled and gave an answer nobody expected. The greatest decision I ever made was learning to notice the people around me. The interviewer asked what he meant. Nathan thought about grace. Sometimes the person who changes your life is not the person with the most power. Sometimes it is the person who chooses to care when nobody else does. Grace heard those words later and smiled. She knew their story was never about a billionaire and a single mother. It was about two people who helped each other become better versions of themselves. One had money but needed compassion. The other had challenges but carried a strength she did not recognize. Together, they discovered that the greatest transformations often begin with the smallest acts of kindness. Because sometimes, the person you stop to help for just one moment becomes the person who changes your entire life forever.